First reading tonight is from Genesis 27 and also from Genesis 33. Now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, "The days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob." But the words of Esau, her older son, were told to Rebekah. So she sent and called Jacob, her younger son, and said to him, "Behold, your brother Esau comforts himself about you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice. Arise, flee to Laban my brother in Haran, and stay with him a while, until your brother's fury turns away, until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him. Then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereft of you both in one day?" Then Rebekah said to Isaac, "I loathe my life because of the Hittite women. If Jacob marries one of the Hittite women like these, one of the women of the land, what good will my life be to me?" And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants, and he put the servants with their children in front. Then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. He himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children, he said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" And Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." And Jacob said, "No, please, if I have found favor in your sight, then accept my presents from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me. Please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough." Thus he urged him, and he took it. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Please stand for the reading of the gospel. Our reading tonight is from Luke 23, verses 32 through 43. 2 others, who were criminals, were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And they cast lots to divide his garments. And the people stood by, watching, but the rulers scoffed at him, saying, "He saved others. Let him save himself, if he is the Christ of God, his chosen one." The soldiers also mocked him, coming up and offering him sour wine and saying, "If you are the king of the Jews, save yourself." There was also an inscription over him, "This is the King of the Jews." One of the criminals who were hanged railed at him, saying, "Are you not the Christ? Save yourself and us." But the other rebuked him, saying, "Do you not fear God, since you are under the same judgment of condemnation? And we indeed justly, for we are receiving the due reward for our deeds. But this man has done nothing wrong." And he said, "Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And he said to him, "Truly I say to you, today you will be with me in paradise." This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated.
Thank you, Tom. Over the last several weeks, we have been going through a number of different vices that we battle and the virtues that God works to cultivate in our lives. And you may remember some of those of you who've been with us through several of our weeks. And today we bring it to an end as we talk about anger and forgiveness. So here's a question for you. What are some things that we use? How do we describe anger? This is where you can actually speak up a few things here. How would you describe anger? What are some words, expressions that you use, or maybe that are popular out there? Mad. Hot. What was that, Evan? Frustrated. Ticked. Yeah, we'll keep it PG as if we go too much further down some of these roads, but yeah, there are lots of phrases out there that really describe anger in a lot of ways. And so I'm going to change it a little bit now. What happens to you when anger strikes? And I'm talking from a physical standpoint. What are some of the things that happen when you get angry? Your blood pressure goes up. You turn red. You shout. Your muscles tighten up. Some get a headache. You say things you don't mean. Or maybe you mean them, but you didn't want to say them, right? Yeah, in fact, it's really interesting. When you start to, there's all sorts of different things that come up with it. And some of the other phrases I came up with, like you blow up at someone. Or the old cartoon picture, steam is coming out of their ears, right? And that's what we look at when we think about it. The color red tends to be what we think of with anger as well. That's because anger is hot. What happens when you get angry? You get hot. There's a whole reason that we have that phrase, you're hot under the collar. That's why we use the red, because that's the color of fire, the color of heat emanating from something. Your face becomes flushed. In fact, there's this really interesting thing that happens to you physiologically when you get angry. Your blood starts to flow to your muscles and less to the other parts of your body. Your muscles are getting ready to fight. And so you need your strength. It starts to create endorphins that are released inside your body. So it actually feels good to get angry. You breathe faster. Your blood pressure increases. It's kind of nice to have that really good, powerful feeling. And yet, it's exhausting. Because your body simply cannot continue to do that for great lengths of time. And that's part of how God created us. You are not created to carry anger around in your life for a long time. And yet what happens when you click in the morning and go to your news feed? Or when you turn your TV on and go to whatever the news channel is that you might follow? You're probably not seeing stuff that's there to make you feel good about things. In fact, it almost seems as though there is a design to create anger, to turn on outrage at everything that we have, and it causes us then to react as we're hearing what's going on, and we start to think, well, that's not right. Now I'm angry about this, and it becomes a nonstop thing. It actually, as you start to get those endorphins flowing, your body says, I need more. And so what do you keep doing? You keep looking for more. And that's why we find ourselves in our day and age living in a culture of outrage and a society of anger. And then we wonder at night, why can't I turn off my mind? Why can't I seem to calm down and relax? The emotion of anger can be a challenging one. But there is some good news here. Emotions in and of themselves are not sinful. Think about it. If emotions were sinful, then what would happen when you were happy? How many people have ever thought, oh, wow, you're happy. You should really not do that so much. That's not really God-pleasing. Or is it a natural reaction to have sadness when something bad happens in life? And yet we don't go around telling people sadness is a sin. Now we recognize that it's not how God designed us. It's the indication of a broken, imperfect, fallen, sinful human world. And so that's why we can say emotions in and of themselves are not necessarily sinful. In fact, when you see certain things, you should actually have the emotion of anger because it's not right. In fact, there's a great story of this in the Bible. There's a man by the name of Nathan who goes up to the king, and a man by the name of David, and he tells him a story. There's this rich man. He's got all of these sheep. I mean, he's got so many he can't even count them. And then this guy comes to visit him, but rather than picking one of his own sheep and putting it on the table for the meal that night, he goes to this guy who barely has a family, has a pet lamb that stays in the house with him. He takes that one, he butchers it, and gives it to his friend. And it tells us in there that David is outraged at that, which he should be, because that's not right. What happens next, though, after the emotion of anger, is where we often find ourselves straying into sin. What we do with that emotion can go a long way toward determining when we're walking down that road in the battle with the soul. And as it is with so many of the vices we've talked about, it's what we do once we realize that we're there that makes all the difference. Because one of the things that anger does is it gives us not just the power of our body, but it also gives us a sense of power over the other person. I see that you're doing something and that is not right, and now we feel ourselves, rather than seeing them as equals, we're now a little bit better than they are because they should know better than doing that. After all, we have the best interests in mind. They obviously don't. And so anger turns us to focus more on ourselves. We start to think about how we're doing in comparison with others, and we find ourselves being exalted more than what the other is. And so it puts us into a position of judgment on the other. I'm right, and they are wrong. And at its very worst, it serves to put us in the place of God. We know what's right. They're wrong, and they need to pay for it. Truth is, anger can actually be a good thing in life. It can be something that inspires us to work for a better situation. But the thing about anger is kind of like these candles right here behind me. Have you ever done this trick before where you just run your hand quickly through a flame? Doesn't really hurt. You can do that, and your hand doesn't catch on fire. A brush of anger can be something that says, hey, there's something wrong here that needs to be addressed. But what happens when you hold on to that anger too long? It's going to burn you in the end. Because the reality is there's only one who has that place of being able to look down and say, this is wrong, and I have the ability to make it right. It's the one who created us, the one who perfectly knows our hearts and our minds and our motives. In fact, it says it very clearly in the Bible. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. Because what is one of the almost seemingly inevitable outcomes of anger? To get even. In fact, years later, Paul, writing to the Romans, would say, beloved, never avenge yourselves, leave it to the wrath of God. And that's where we find that anger actually does serve to put us in the place of God. Anger tends to lead to reveal our lack of trust in God. We don't think that He will see justice done. And therefore, we need to be the ones who take it into our hands. We feel compelled to do so on His behalf because God just isn't stepping in the way that we think He should. And that's where then forgiveness begins to enter into the picture. Rather than seeing us elevating ourselves up here while we see the other down here, forgiveness brings us back to the same level. It levels the playing field with us, which is actually why a good color for forgiveness would be blue, because it cools us down. If anger heats us up, forgiveness cools us down. It cools our emotions toward the others. And while our emotions may not be sinful in and of themselves, we are wise to be mindful of how they serve to either create or to tear down barriers that may exist between us and others. And that's where forgiveness breaks into this picture, because forgiveness breaks down the walls that get built up. It restores relationships to the state that God intended for them to be lived in. And that's something that we, especially as Christians, are aware of. Because we know there is so much that is going to come up between people in this world. We live in a sinful and broken, fallen world, and each one of us has that same problem. In a way, we could almost think that walking through life without forgiveness is to actually partially disable ourselves. We're choosing not to function with part of how God created us. And then that's where we see Jesus. Because forgiveness is what Jesus' heart is all about. Even as we heard, as he was being nailed to the cross, Jesus did not take vengeance, but left room for the wrath of God. In fact, while we think about how bad things have happened in our lives, we find in the life of Jesus, and especially even those last few hours before he was on the cross, that he suffered some of the worst injustice that this world will ever know. Has anyone here ever been betrayed by a friend? He was sold for 30 silver coins by someone who was close to him for 3 years. Anyone here ever have someone say, hey, you did something when you didn't do it? Jesus was wrongfully accused. Anyone here ever had someone tell you off for something that you didn't do? Jesus was illegally put to trial. He was wrongfully beaten. In fact, what we even find then is that he is a pawn in a political game that happens, seen as someone who can be used to tweak the other rather than someone who actually cares about what happens to him. And then finally on the cross, made to bear the wrath of God for what everyone else in the world had done. If anyone could have had the heat of anger and it had been a righteous anger, it could have been Jesus at that moment who said, you know what, Father, enough of this, away with all of them. But in the midst of all that, those aren't the words we hear. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they are doing. Interesting phrase right there, because yes, we recognize the people there did not know that they were crucifying God necessarily. But think about it in your life too for a moment. How many times are the people that you may have anger at not actually knowing what they're doing? Not in that they aren't aware of it, but that they don't even realize that their actions have an impact on you the way that they do. Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. That's what Jesus came to do. You are now covered with his forgiveness, and we recognize the depth of what he has done, and that means that we are covered with that forgiveness that he has given. And we are then changed by his Spirit as his Spirit works in our lives. And that means that we strive for forgiveness. In fact, forgiveness is the defining and distinguishing hallmark of the Christian faith. It is a faith that looks to say forgiveness is there no matter how bad it may have been done to you. Forgiveness is what defines the Christian faith. And so forgiveness is what flows from Jesus through the Spirit to you in your life. Jesus is at the center of our lives because we live as a people who are forgiven by what he has done. And then we strive in our lives to live that forgiveness out from us to others through what Jesus has done for us. And that's why for us next week is so important. Because next week we will be making our yearly journey with Jesus to Jerusalem. We will join him at the temple. We will be with him in the upper room. We will be in the dark place of Gethsemane. We will see him there in Pilate's palace being mocked. We'll see him at Golgotha. And then we finally see him in a tomb. All to accomplish our forgiveness. And as we see the price that God was willing to pay for us, we also realize that God's Spirit works in our hearts to cultivate a forgiving spirit in us. So may an active life of forgiveness be the hallmark and distinguishing characteristic of your life, just as you are defined by the forgiveness of God in Jesus. Amen. May the peace of God, which is beyond our understanding, guard your hearts and souls in true faith to life everlasting. I invite you to stand for our prayers.